In 1964, a 30-year-old accountant drove to a track meet in Eugene, Oregon, opened the trunk of his car, and laid out 12 pairs of Japanese running shoes on a folding table. He had no store, no brand, no marketing budget, no employees. He had a handshake agreement with a shoe factory in Japan that he had visited once, a suitcase full of samples and a belief so irrational that every investor, every banker, and every business advisor he approached told him the same thing. This will never work. By the end of that first day, he had sold all 12 pairs. He called his partner that night and said 3 words that would eventually become the foundation of a $50 billion empire. Send more shoes. His name was Phil Knight. His partner was Bill Bowerman, a track coach at the University of Oregon, who would one day pour rubber into his wife's waffle iron to invent the soul that changed athletic footwear forever. The company they built together was not built on genius. It was not built on capital. It was not built on connections or privilege or timing. It was built on one decision that Phil Knight made at the age of 24, sitting in a Stanford classroom writing a paper that most of his classmates forgot before they graduated. He decided to believe in something before he had any reason to. That decision, and everything that followed from it, is the most important business story of the 20th century. Not because of the shoes, but because of what the shoes reveal about the nature of belief, partnership, and the specific kind of madness that separates the people who build empires from the people who only dream about them. This is the real Nike story, and it begins not in a boardroom, but in a Stanford classroom in 1962, with a 24-year-old who had just returned from Japan and could not stop thinking about running shoes. Philip Hampson Knight grew up in Portland, Oregon, the son of a newspaper publisher who expected his son to follow a conventional path. Knight was a runner, genuinely talented, genuinely passionate, genuinely frustrated by the quality of American athletic shoes in the early 1960s. American running shoes in 1962 were heavy, poorly designed, and expensive. The market was dominated by German brands, Adidas and Puma, whose quality was significantly superior but whose prices were beyond what most American athletes could afford. Knight, who ran middle distance for Oregon under Bill Bowerman, experienced this frustration personally, daily, for 4 years. He went to Stanford Business School, and in an entrepreneurship class taught by Frank Schallenberger, he was assigned to develop a small business concept. Knight wrote about Japanese running shoes. His argument was simple and, in retrospect, obviously correct. Japanese manufacturing was producing high-quality goods at dramatically lower cost than Western competitors. This had already transformed the camera market. Nikon and Canon were destroying German optical manufacturers on price and quality simultaneously. Knight argued the same disruption was coming for athletic shoes, and whoever got to Japan first found the right manufacturer and built the distribution network would own the American running market. He presented the paper. His professor gave him a B+. Knight thought the idea was worth more than that. In 1962, with borrowed money and a one-way ticket, he flew to Japan. He had no appointment with any shoe manufacturer. He had no business established in the United States. He had, by his own account in his memoir, Shoe Dog, almost no plan whatsoever beyond showing up and seeing what happened. What happened was Onitsuka Tiger. Knight walked into the Onitsuka Tiger factory in Kobe without an introduction, without credentials, and without a company. When the executives asked him what company he represented, he said the first thing that came into his mind: Blue Ribbon Sports. Blue Ribbon Sports did not exist. He invented it on the spot, in a conference room in Japan, while Japanese executives waited for his answer. They gave him the distribution rights for the Western United States. This moment, this improvised, entirely fabricated company name offered to foreign executives who had no reason to believe in him, is the first lesson inside the Nike story. Knight did not have a company. He had a belief that he should have one, and he treated that belief as if it were already real, in a room where the only thing that mattered was whether the people across the table believed him. They did, because he did. He returned to Portland with sample shoes and a distribution agreement. He showed them to the one person whose opinion he trusted above every other in the world of running. Bill Bowerman. William J. Bowerman was not a businessman. He was a coach, arguably the greatest track and field coach in American history, a man who would eventually coach 31 Olympic athletes, 16 national champions, and one young middle-distance runner named Phil Knight, who was good but not great and knew it. Bowerman was obsessed with one thing: the shoe on his athletes' feet. He had spent years cutting apart running shoes, rebuilding them, adding and removing material, trying to reduce weight by fractions of an ounce because he understood something that the shoe industry had not yet calculated precisely. 1 ounce of weight on a running shoe equals 55 pounds of extra lifting over a 1-mile race. Bowerman was the most qualified person in the country to evaluate Knight's Japanese samples. He looked at them for 30 seconds and said he wanted in. Knight had his partner. Blue Ribbon Sports, the company that didn't exist, suddenly had 2 founders, a product, and a distribution agreement. What it did not have was money. Knight was working as an accountant at a Portland firm. He was selling shoes on weekends at track meets from the trunk of his car, mailing order forms to coaches and athletes across the Pacific Northwest, and reinvesting every dollar of profit immediately into the next order from Japan. The early years of Blue Ribbon Sports were defined by a cash crisis so permanent and so severe that Knight has described the entire decade of the 1960s as a continuous near-death experience for the company. Every time they found a new customer, they needed more inventory. Every time they ordered more inventory, they needed more money. Every time they went to the bank for more money, the bank looked at their growth and their lack of profitability and said no. Knight was selling millions of dollars of shoes and was perpetually broke. Not because the business was failing, because it was growing faster than any bank was willing to finance. This is the second lesson inside the Nike story. Growth is not the same as stability. The most dangerous moment for any business is not when it is struggling. It is when it is growing faster than its financing can support. More businesses die from growing too fast than from growing too slow. Knight survived this period through a combination of desperate creativity, personal sacrifice, and a willingness to operate in the space between solvency and collapse for longer than any rational person would have tolerated. He delayed payments. He borrowed from family. He negotiated terms with suppliers that no established company would have accepted. He paid himself almost nothing for years while the company he was building grew into something that the bank still refused to acknowledge was real. And then, in 1971, 2 things happened that changed everything. The first was the Waffle iron. Bill Bowerman, sitting at his breakfast table one Sunday morning in Eugene, Oregon, looked at his wife's Waffle iron and had a thought that was either genius or madness. He was never entirely sure which. He poured liquid urethane rubber into the Waffle iron. His wife was not pleased. The rubber hardened into a waffle-patterned sole that, when attached to a running shoe upper, provided traction and cushioning that no existing athletic shoe had ever achieved. The grid pattern of the Waffle trapped air. It was lighter than conventional soles. It gripped surfaces better. It was, by every measure that mattered to a runner, superior to everything else on the market. Bowerman had invented the Waffle sole in his kitchen on a Sunday morning. The invention would eventually become one of the most recognized design elements in the history of athletic footwear. The second thing that happened in 1971 was the name. Blue Ribbon Sports needed a new identity. The relationship with Onitsuka Tiger was deteriorating. Knight had discovered that Tiger was negotiating with other American distributors behind his back, and he had made the decision to break the relationship and manufacture his own shoes entirely. This meant he needed a brand, a name, an identity that would stand apart from every other shoe on the market. He called a meeting. His small team of employees submitted ideas. Knight himself submitted Dimension 6, which everyone hated. One employee, Jeff Johnson, the company's first full-time hire, a man who had been sending Knight handwritten letters about shoes for years before Knight finally hired him, out of sheer persistence, woke up from a dream with a single word: Nike, the Greek goddess of victory. Knight was not convinced. He thought it was fine. He had not found anything better. With a manufacturing deadline approaching and a brand identity required, he went with it. Nike. 4 letters, 1 syllable. The goddess of victory. The name of the most recognized athletic brand in human history was chosen by its founder without conviction, under time pressure, because nothing better was available. This is the 3rd lesson inside the Nike story. The most important decisions in the history of great companies are almost never made with the certainty that the history books later attribute to them. They are made under pressure, with incomplete information, by people who are not sure they are right, but who understand that not deciding is worse than deciding wrong. Knight was not certain Nike was the right name. He was certain that Blue Ribbon Sports was the wrong one. That distinction, knowing what you are moving away from more clearly than you know what you are moving toward, is the actual experience of building something new. And every founder who tells you they always knew exactly what they were doing is either lying to you or lying to themselves. In 1971, Knight hired a graphic design student named Carolyn Davidson to create a logo. He told her he needed something that suggested motion. She presented several options. He chose the one that bothered him least. He paid her $35. That design is now called the Swoosh, the most recognized commercial symbol on Earth. In 1983, Knight called Davidson back and gave her Nike stock that would eventually be worth over $1 million. $35 became $1 million. Because context is the multiplier, and context is built slowly over years by people who kept going when every rational sign said stop. In 1972, at the Olympic trials in Eugene, Oregon, Nike shoes appeared on the feet of competitive American runners for the first time. They were not perfect. They were not finished. They were, by Knight's own admission, a product that needed more development time than the deadline allowed. But they were on the track. They were real, and the athletes who wore them ran in them and did not complain. This was enough. Knight understood something that more cautious entrepreneurs never learn. A product does not need to be perfect to enter the market. It needs to be good enough to survive contact with real customers, and then improved, rapidly and continuously, based on what those customers reveal. The pursuit of perfection before launch is not discipline. It is fear wearing the costume of standards. Nike entered the market imperfect and improved faster than any competitor because it was receiving real feedback from real athletes from the first day. But the moment that truly separated Nike from every other athletic shoe company in the world did not happen on a track. It happened in a hotel room in Exeter, New Hampshire in 1980, when a young runner named Rob DeCastella agreed to wear Nike shoes in the World Cross Country Championships. Actually, the moment that changed everything happened 4 years earlier, in 1976, with an 18-year-old runner from Beaverton, Oregon, who had never won a major race and who would go on to become the most commercially significant athlete in the history of professional sports. His name was Steve Prefontaine. And then, after Prefontaine died in a car accident in 1975 at the age of 24, the moment that changed everything happened with a different runner. A basketball player, actually, from North Carolina. His name was Michael Jordan. In 1984, Nike was a successful company, but not a dominant one. Adidas owned basketball. Converse owned basketball. Nike made running shoes and was beginning to expand into other categories. But basketball was not its territory, and everyone in the industry knew it. Michael Jordan was the most coveted rookie in the 1984 NBA draft. He wanted to sign with Adidas. Adidas was not particularly interested. Converse offered him a deal similar to what they gave every other player. Modest, undifferentiated, forgettable. Nike offered him something that had never been done before in the history of athletic endorsements. His own shoe. Not a signature colorway, not his name on an existing model, his own shoe. Designed around him, named for him. Marketed as an extension of his identity rather than a product he was paid to hold up for a camera. The Air Jordan 1 launched in 1985. The NBA fined Jordan $5,000 every game he wore them because they violated the league's uniform color policy. Nike paid the fines, happily, because the controversy generated more publicity than any marketing campaign they could have purchased. The Air Jordan 1 generated $162 million in revenue in its first year. Nike had projected $4 million. This moment, the decision to build an entire brand architecture around a single athlete's identity, rather than simply paying him to wear an existing product, is the fourth lesson inside the Nike story. And it is the lesson that every brand, in every industry, is still trying to learn 40 years later. The most powerful marketing does not tell the customer about the product. It tells the customer who they will become if they use the product. Jordan did not sell shoes. He sold the possibility of becoming someone who moved like Jordan, competed like Jordan, refused to lose like Jordan. The shoe was the physical object. The identity was the product. This is why Nike's revenues went from $900 million in 1983 to $4 billion in 1989. Not because the shoes improved dramatically, because the story around the shoes became the most compelling narrative in American popular culture. By 1988, Nike had commissioned an advertising agency called Weeden & Kennedy to develop a new campaign. Dan Weeden, preparing for the pitch, was looking for a line that captured the Nike mentality, the relentless, almost irrational commitment to forward motion that had defined the company since Phil Knight opened his car trunk in Eugene in 1964. He found it in an unlikely place. Gary Gilmore was a convicted murderer who was executed in Utah in 1977. His final words before the firing squad were reported to be, "Let's do it." Weeden changed 3 words, just do it. 3 words that have generated more brand value than any other phrase in the history of advertising. 3 words that were inspired by a death sentence. 3 words that Phil Knight, when he first heard them in the pitch meeting, thought were fine but not exceptional. He was wrong. Dan Weeden was right. And the ability to recognize when someone on your team sees something you cannot see yet, and to trust that vision even when your own instincts disagree, is perhaps the most underrated skill in the entire catalog of leadership. Knight built Nike, but Nike became what it is because Knight was surrounded by people who could see things he could not, and he was wise enough to listen. By 2023, Nike's annual revenue exceeded $51 billion. The company employs 79,000 people. The Jordan brand alone generates more than $5 billion annually. For a shoe line named after a man who retired from professional basketball more than 20 years ago. Phil Knight stepped down as chairman in 2016. He is worth approximately $40 billion. He has given away more than $1 billion, most of it to the University of Oregon, where Bill Bowerman once coached him around a track and first showed him what it meant to pursue excellence in the details that no one else thought mattered. Bowerman died in 1999. He never became a billionaire. He was not interested in becoming one. He was interested in the soul of the shoe, in the fraction of an ounce that separated a good runner from a great one, in the waffle iron that his wife has never entirely forgiven him for. The Nike story is not a story about shoes. It is not a story about marketing or celebrity endorsements or the power of a 3-word slogan. It is a story about what happens when 2 people, one who can see the market and one who can see the product, find each other at exactly the right moment and decide to build something together that neither of them could have built alone. Knight needed Bowerman's obsession with the shoe. Bowerman needed Knight's obsession with the business. Neither of them knew in 1964 that the thing they were building would outlast both of them by generations and put its mark on the feet of more human beings than any product in the history of commerce. They just kept going, through the bank rejections and the cash crises and the manufacturer betrayals and the legal battles and the years of paying themselves nothing, while the company grew into something the world had not seen before. The 5th and final lesson inside the Nike story is the simplest one, and it is the one that Phil Knight put on the cover of his memoir, in the dedication, in 2 words that explain more about how empires are built than any business school curriculum ever written. Let me be the first to tell you that it's not as simple as it sounds, and the second to tell you that nothing worth building ever is. Shoe dog. A shoe dog is what the old-timers in the footwear industry called someone who loved shoes with an irrational, all-consuming, slightly embarrassing passion. Someone who could not stop thinking about them. Someone for whom the shoe was never just a product, it was a calling. Phil Knight was a shoe dog. Bill Bowerman was a shoe dog. And the empire they built is the proof that the most dangerous person in any industry is not the one with the most money, or the best connections, or the most sophisticated strategy. It is the one who cares the most, the one who opens the trunk of their car at a track meet in Eugene with 12 pairs of shoes and a belief so irrational that everyone around them thinks they are going to fail. And just does it anyway. If this story changed how you think about what you are building, subscribe. The next Empire Files episode goes inside the most secretive luxury empire ever constructed. A family that has never given a press conference, never appeared on a rich list voluntarily, never allowed a journalist inside their headquarters, yet controls brands that every person watching this video has encountered today without knowing who owns them. The structure of wealth is never what it appears to be. Stay silent, build quietly, and own everything you touch.